Tomato blight is a gardener's worst nightmare and a very destructive disease. If you've ever had a problem with it, you've probably felt a little bit like this. Oh no! I know, it's very frustrating. You put all your hard work and effort into growing your tomatoes, only for them to be ruined. But do not fret, as there are things you can do even if you think it is too late, and there are steps you can take to ensure that this does not happen again. If tomato blight is a big problem for you, then you won't want to miss out on the important information about blight which is in this video, so do make sure you stick around to the end. So there are actually two types of blight which we're going to be talking about: early blight, or Alternaria solanae, and late, also known as potato blight, or scientifically known as Phytophthora infestans. We're going to be focusing more on late blight, as this is the most destructive, but we'll touch on early blight as well. But firstly, what actually is tomato blight? Tomato blight is a fungus which spreads via spores in the air, and it's not just tomatoes that can be affected, potatoes can be quite badly affected by it as well. The disease becomes active when conditions are favourable, which in the case of blight is warm and humid. Now, late blight can survive in live tissues such as potatoes in the ground over winter. Spores attach themselves to the leaves and the stems of the plant and spread rapidly, eventually killing the plant as a result. This is a very big problem and can easily wipe out your entire crop. But how do you identify late blight in the first place? Perhaps this is your first ever encounter with it, and sometimes it can be mistaken for other things. There are some nutrient deficiencies which could be mistaken for late blight, but characteristics of late blight are unique. Late blight is characterised by black blotches and areas on the leaves and stems, and these areas will go soggy, shrivel up and eventually die off. The presence of these black lesions on the stem is also another indicator of blight. When the disease is very active and spreading, a white mold-like growth may also be present as well. As the infection worsens and spreads, the fruits will also become affected, and they will go a horrible brown, dark, rotten, really. They're not going to be a very nice tomato, not exactly the sweet red tomato which you're hoping for, really. So early blight and late blight. What's the difference? Well, as I alluded before, there are two different types of blight. So as the name suggests, early blight occurs earlier in the growing season, unlike late blight, which of course occurs later in the growing season. But early blight can actually occur at any part of the growing season, not just early on. Early blight can overwinter in the soil and in dead plant tissues to reactivate the following year. The fungus can survive for several years in the soil. So once you have a problem with early blight, you're probably going to have a reoccurring problem year after year. And this fungus does not need a living host to survive. Unlike our late blight, which needs a living host like our potato tubers, early blight does not need that. It can survive in just the open soil without any living materials at all. And of course, indicators of early blight also differ from that of late blight as well. Infections start off as black spots with yellow rings around them towards the bottom half of the plant. So it all sounds like pretty nasty stuff, doesn't it? Well, I'm sure you'll be pleased to know that there are plenty of things which you can do about this blight problem. So you've successfully identified that you have tomato blight, but what should you do next? Now, you should cut off all infected foliage immediately to slow the spread of the blight, whether it's late blight or early blight that you have. but early blight is much less vigorous than late blight. So with early blight, as long as you start cutting off them infected bits of foliage early enough, you should be able to save your plant, and it will still grow on to produce a crop, so long as you catch it in good time. Now, no matter what blight you have, that infected foliage that you do cut off, it's important that you do burn this and don't throw it in your compost. You don't want to harbour blight spores in your compost and run the risk of infecting your plants again the following year. Now, you probably could get away with composting this infected material if you're using a hot composting process. Now, unfortunately, when late blight has a hold on your tomato plants, it is usually too late and will eventually kill your tomato plant, and you're probably not going to be able to save it, because late blight is much more vigorous than early blight. Now, the most important thing really is just cut off that infected foliage, burn it, and hopefully you'll be able to salvage some sort of crop later down the line. Or to be honest, if the infection's really bad, you're best just discarding of the tomato plant really. And of course, remember, when you are cutting off infected foliage, clean your secateurs in between use, because you don't want to run the risk of spreading disease around your tomato plants. Now, as I mentioned previously, it is possible to try and salvage some sort of tomato crop, even if you think your tomatoes are badly infected with blight. Now, this is possible because you can take them unripe tomatoes and you can ripen them at home. And you can do this by sticking them in a bag, in a paper bag, for example, with a banana or an apple, and the ethylene gas, which is emitted by these bananas and apples, helps ripen those tomatoes. And tomatoes actually ripen from the inside out, not from the outside in, as some people might think. But there is something to be wary of when you're doing this, especially if you've had a problem with blight on your tomatoes, and that is just keeping an eye out for little brown spots of blight on them and unripe tomatoes, because them little spots of blight can quickly spread amongst the entire lot and completely destroy all your unripe tomatoes which you're trying to ripen. So do be wary of that. Only try and salvage green tomatoes from your blight infected plants if there's no visible signs of blight on the tomatoes. Okay, so we know what blight is, we've identified it, and we've now tried to take care of it and try and slow down the spread of it. But what do we now do in the future to reduce the risk of it happening again? You should be doing all of these things. Now, the first thing you should do when you're planting your tomato plants is space them far enough apart. I usually space them around 20 to 24 inches apart, and that allows for adequate circulation around the plants so blight spores can not as easily land on the leaves and the stems. Now, you may think that you're going to be getting more of a tomato crop, and this really is a false economy, because by placing your tomato plants too close together, you're going to be creating many other problems as well, which I'm not going to go into in this video, but you're actually going to be increasing your risk of blight quite a lot. When watering your tomato plants, you should never ever water from the top, and you should try and avoid watering the foliage if possible as well. You should always water from the base of the plant around the soil, and because you don't want them leaves, you don't want that stem to get wet. Any moisture on the stems and leaves of your tomato plant is going to provide an environment which blight will thrive in. Use a rose on the end of your watering can to reduce the amount of soil which splashes up onto the plant. You don't want all these nasty pathogens out of the soil splashing up onto your tomato plant, because this will really increase the risk of you having an incident with blight. As your tomato plants get bigger, sort of like this, reaching the top of the polytunnel, cut off any old and dying foliage towards the bottom half of the plant, because this is going to further help with air circulation around the plants, which will stop them blight spores from being able to land on them. And to be honest, it's also good working practice, because you don't want these old, dying, rotten leaves lying around either, because that's also going to increase our risk as well. Now you should also apply a mulch around your tomato plants as well. Now this could be grass clippings, this could be straw, this could be wood chip, it could be many different things, but this is going to reduce the risk of soil splashing up onto our plants as well when you're watering. So not only putting a rose on the end of your watering can, but also applying a mulch. This really does greatly reduce the soil splashback. And there are many other benefits as well, like it's going to make it easier for watering as well. It's going to hold in the moisture in the soil, so you can have a much easier time with watering. And when you're growing in a greenhouse or a polytunnel, ensure that vents and doors are open and your growing space is well ventilated. This is obviously going to improve the air circulation, and like I said before, then blight spores are less likely to land on your tomato plants. I would say this is probably one of the most important things to remember actually. If your greenhouse isn't well ventilated, you've got a really high risk of having a problem with blight. So I'd say a well ventilated growing area is probably one of the most important things on this list. Now, if you've had a problem with blight in previous years, it's important to either use new compost and avoid using the compost which you used last year, or if you're growing in the open ground, grow your tomatoes in a different bed to reduce the risk of reinfecting your plants the next year. Now, another thing to avoid your risk of blight is by watering early in the morning. Now, I know a lot of this water is going to evaporate throughout the day, and some people like to water in the evening as they feel their plants will get a better drink. But in the case of tomatoes, you're not going to have much of a problem with soil evaporation during the day if you've applied a mulch. But water evaporates much slower at night than it does in the morning and throughout the day. So if you water in the evening, you're going to increase your risk of blight because there's going to be moist conditions. So by watering early in the morning, you're further reducing your risk of blight. Now, the next thing on my list is cleaning your greenhouse or polytunnel well at the beginning and end of every growing season. Using a strong disinfectant such as Jay's fluid, for example, that's what I use. That is an effective method of cleaning your greenhouse to ensure that there's no blight spores remaining in your greenhouse. Now, while late blight generally needs a live host such as a potato tuber to survive over winter, a mild environment in a greenhouse or polytunnel can still harbour late blight spores and it can still survive till the next year. So just to reduce every risk of this happening again, it's important just keep your greenhouse clean, keep it disinfected really. I like to do mine at the beginning and the end of the growing season. Now, if you find that you're doing all these things and you're still having a problem with tomato blight, then there are certain varieties of tomato which are resistant to blight, and a couple which I can name are Mountain Magic and Crimson Crush. These two varieties are very resistant to blight and are well suited for growing outdoors as well. So there are other options as well. There are varieties which will withstand blight. So do not despair if you've done all these things in this list and you're still having a problem. There are other solutions as well. Now, you can spray your plants prior to infection with a preventative fungicide spray, or you can make your own, which kind of just delays and slows down the infection really, in my experience, and I've had quite mixed results with it, but I'll tell you the recipe for this preventative homemade spray. Now, this homemade spray consists of 2 litres of water, 1 tablespoon of bicarbonate of soda, half a tablespoon of washing up liquid, and half a tablespoon of vegetable oil. Now, you want to mix this solution well and add it to a pressurized spray bottle. And you want to apply this around 1 to 2 times per week. And this solution is alkaline, and this helps balance out the acidity on the surface of the tomato plant, which is naturally acidic, and blight thrives in an acidic environment. So this solution reduces the acidity and balances it out a little bit more, which stops blight really from taking hold. Now, as I said, I've had mixed results with this, and I found it just really delays the blight taking hold. But maybe you could give this a go at home, and I'd love to hear your results on it and what happens with you. So do let me know in the comments below if you want to try this, and yeah, I'd love to hear your results. Now, you may also be wondering if you can still eat blight infected tomatoes. Now, thankfully, blight cannot infect humans. I think that would be very, very nasty, wouldn't it? Now, when blight infects the unripe fruits, it will quickly spread around that tomato, and it will be completely rotten before it has a chance to ripen. But if you've got a ripe tomato with just a little bit of blight, you know, if the infection took hold a little bit later, you can cut those little bits of infected tomato off, and the rest of the tomato will be safe to eat. But it will be more palatable. It's not going to be dangerous to eat blight. It'll be fine. Just won't taste very nice. You know, I don't think it would imagine. I've never tried it, but I don't think it's going to taste very nice. So yeah, if there's a little bit of blight on there, just cut off the infected areas, and the rest of the tomato will be fine to eat. Have you had any experience with early or late blight? Let me know in the comments below, because I would love to hear how you deal with tomato blight. So I hope I helped answer any blight related questions which you had, and I wish you all the very best of luck in fighting this nasty disease. So if you found this video useful, then you may be interested in watching any of these tomato videos as well. And remember, the best way that you can support me is by hitting that like button, so YouTube knows to recommend this video to other like-minded users as well. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you can see when I upload new content just like this. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Happy gardening and stay safe.